Top speaking tips for the IELTS speaking test. I've been an IELTS examiner for over 10 years in Taipei City and Adelaide, Australia. I've also been working as an IELTS tutor online for many years, and I've conducted many IELTS mock speaking tests and also corrected thousands of essays. And also I'm an IELTS author. I've published books for the speaking, writing, listening and reading test. These are available on Amazon.com and also with certain publishers in various countries. Let's start with the first of the 4 grading criteria, fluency and coherence. And what can you do to prepare for your test and increase your score? Well, fluency is basically about your speaking speed. My first piece of advice is to get familiar with the test. By being familiar with the test, the types of questions that get asked and how to answer them, you're going to be able to speak much more fluently in your test. It'll also make you feel more comfortable and relaxed. I also suggest that you practice answering current questions. A lot of the current questions are available on websites. You just need to search the internet and you can find some of the current questions. Of course, not all of the current questions are there, but you can see some of them. And if you practice answering these questions, then you might be lucky and get this question in your real test, which means it's going to be easy to answer, because basically it's always easier to talk about something you've already talked about before, and also to answer a question that you've seen before. It'll also avoid some nasty surprises as well. And then I suggest you learn ways to extend your answers. Some common ways to extend your answers are to give more than one main idea. For instance, if you're asked what kind of movies you like, instead of just giving one type of movies like comedies, you could say comedies and then also go on and talk about action movies. And another technique is to go from general to specific. If you like action movies, you could be more specific about what type. Maybe it's action movies that have car chases in them. And then you could even give some examples, such as the Fast and Furious series of movies. Pronunciation is the second grading criteria, and you can improve your score and prepare for your test in a couple of ways. First of all, work on any known mispronunciations that you have. If you don't know what mispronunciations you have, get somebody to listen to you. I do mock speaking tests. It doesn't have to be me. Anybody who you think has a decent level of English should be able to help. You can also look at mispronunciations that are common for your country. Let's use the example of Chinese students. I often come across a couple of unusual words from them. The first one is an odd word called urally. 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 I've come to realize that this is actually the word usually. And the other thing I often hear from Chinese students is this fantastic new method of communicating called the internet. Well, I've come to realize that the internet is actually the internet. You should also work on having some rhythm and intonation, especially if you're trying to get to level 7 and above. This is because the examiner is looking for this to award higher scores. This often works together with fluency. Basically, if you're speaking too slowly, word by word, you won't have a lot of rhythm and intonation, so you need to learn to speed up and to speak in chunks. Practice. Most students seem unwilling to do this. They're quite willing to spend hours working on vocabulary or grammar, but quite unwilling to practice speaking, to work on their pronunciation. This is a big mistake. Just 10 minutes a day can have a huge impact on your pronunciation. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you want to be good at something, practice it. If you want to be able to speak English well, practice it. Practice speaking. Have a mock test with me. Have a speaking partner. Even speak on your own. You can record yourself if you want to, and then you can listen back and do some self-assessment. Do you have any problems? Vocabulary. Students love to focus on this. It's easy, isn't it? You just buy a big book on vocabulary. Actually, that doesn't work so well, and I suggest a targeted approach. Focus firstly on idiomatic expressions. Why? Because the examiner's looking for these, especially for level 7 and above. The grading criteria for level 7 says uses high-level language such as idiomatic expressions. It only to me to use idiomatic expressions. Secondly, prepare some adjectives for part 2 of your test. Every topic for part 2 starts with the word describe. Therefore, it only makes sense to prepare some adjectives. Why? Because describing requires adjectives. Describe a person. He is an extrovert, or he's extroverted. This means that he has an outgoing personality. He's introverted. This means he's shy. Prepare adjectives, especially for people, places, things, objects, such as your mobile phone, activities, such as outdoor activities you like, and experiences. I have a separate video on this. I'll put the link to it in the description to this video. Practice common topics. What are these common topics? Well, part 1 always starts with one of the following topics: your work or study, the home you're living in, the city or town you're from or are living in now. So you can prepare for these topics. In part 2, almost every question requires you to describe either a person, place, thing, activity, or experience. Even in part 3, there's some typical questions that get frequently asked in the test. I've got separate videos on these common topics for parts 1, 2, and 3 of the test. I'll put a link in the description to this video. By practicing these common topics, you're going to be well prepared for your test. And in the likely case that you get some of these questions, you're going to be able to perform better. You're going to have some high-level vocabulary, and you're also going to find that you're going to be able to respond fluently because you've thought about these common topics before. My final piece of advice here is to not try to learn too many words. This is a big mistake that many students make. Why is it a mistake? Well, a number of reasons. You're likely to misuse words, which will lower your score. You're likely to just forget all the words you've learnt because there are too many. You're likely to mispronounce them because you haven't really used them before and you don't really know how they're pronounced. And finally, what you want to do is to have a narrow range of vocabulary that you can use well, correctly, and not forget to use in your test. I would say about 20 idiomatic expressions is plenty. Maybe 6 adjectives for describing people, places, and things. 6 for each. The key point is to practice using these. This will ensure that you use these words in your test and that you use them correctly. Then on to grammar. Now, the examiner's thinking of 2 things here. They're thinking about the mistakes that you're making, but they're also looking for signs of talent. can you use a wide range of sentences? The first piece of advice is to work on known errors. If you don't know what your common errors are, try to find out. Send me some of your writing for correction. Or get somebody you trust as having a high level of English to help identify some of your weaknesses. A lot of these issues can be seen as occurring depending on what your first language is. Let's take the example again of Chinese, but this applies to many nationalities. In fact, the first issue articles, almost every person seems to have issues with these. Actually, native speakers even have issues with these because they're incredibly difficult to use accurately. And if your language doesn't have articles, then you're not going to be sensitive to the usage of them. So the articles are things like a, an, and the. And essentially, if we have a singular countable noun, we're going to be using a or an. If it's a plural noun, we don't need an article unless we're referring to a specific plural noun, such as the countries in the developed world, or the students who get very high IELTS scores. And then we use the with a singular noun, again when it's something specific, the best way to study. And then the next issue that I'm just showing you there, a lot of people like this structure because so, and it's correct in their first language but not English. In English we can't say something like, because I have to get a high score for IELTS, so I have to study hard. We can't have a so there. Why not? Because it's a conjunction and the so has to go after a finished idea. Because I have to get a high score for IELTS is an unfinished idea, no conjunction. We take the so out. Because I have to get a high score for IELTS, I study very hard. But just not making mistakes is not enough for a high score. It's certainly not enough for getting to 7 and beyond. What's required is a wide range of sentence types, and in particular, complex sentences. Now, complex sentences are where we have a dependent clause or an unfinished idea and an independent clause, a clause that can stand on its own. I gave you an example of that already. Because I need a high score for IELTS, I study very hard. The first clause is unfinished, the second clause is finished. So we've got dependent clause, independent clause, and we can reverse these two. We can reverse the order and put the independent clause first if we want. All right, but how do we form these complex sentences? Well, just like I said with vocabulary, don't try and learn too many ways. Here's a couple of quick ways. First of all, learn how to use relative pronouns, words like who, which, where, when, that. These words add information about a subject. These words add an extra clause onto your sentences. They're also a very good way to extend your ideas, which also helps with fluency and having longer answers. The second one is to use conditionals. These are the if phrases. If I study hard, I will get a high score in my test. When I'm working as an examiner, I listen out for this word because it can be difficult to assess someone's grammar. When I hear this word if, I pay extra attention. If the candidate can get the sentence right, I'm thinking that they're a 7 and perhaps above. If they get it wrong, I'm thinking they're not a 7 and that they're likely to be a 6 or lower. Of course, just one mistake or one correct sentence doesn't determine your score, but it can be a major factor. These if phrases, these conditionals are a powerful way to increase your score if you use them correctly. Alright, so that's a few quick ideas about things that you can work on to prepare for your tests and some ways of increasing your score. If you found the video useful, please like it, And if you'd like to see more of these videos, please subscribe to me so that you'll get notifications when I release new videos.